What is up, folks? My name is Justin Khanna, and this is what I am calling Ask JK, or hashtag Ask JK. This technically isn't the first installment of this. We did kind of like a little AMA a couple weeks back. If you missed that, you folks actually asked a lot of really great questions, and I loved answering them. That's linked up right here. I'm going to try to get in the cadence of doing these every single month, so then I can get in the habit of answering your questions on the regular. And the reason I attached a hashtag to it is, I don't know, YouTube could decide to make hashtags a thing tomorrow. Or maybe I decide to start pulling Instagram questions or Twitter questions, or maybe Facebook blows up and we decide to all go back there. I don't know. I'm like down with the cool kids. I got a hashtag now. But yeah, there's nothing special that you have to do to get your questions submitted. It's just, I'm going to show a little screen share here of like how you go on my account and look in the community tab, and that's where you'll see all my posts, because I know YouTube can kind of be wonky sometimes about what it decides to show you, even though you subscribe to my channel, whatever. Joaquin Johnson says, "Hi Justin, big fan, line cook at Redbird," which I should totally go to when I'm down there. "How do you become faster in the kitchen? This is my first real job in the industry, and I'm learning a lot, but my speed isn't there. Any tips?" This is always an interesting question because, yes, we would all like to be faster. We would all like to either get more stuff done or maybe ideally spend less time in the kitchen. If you could cut your prep time down on a bunch of stuff, you could just come into work a little bit later, because you know that it's not going to take you 7 hours to get ready for service. It's only going to take you 5. And I don't always like to give answers about changing speed, because sometimes, depending on the type of worker you are, that will kind of degrade the level of quality. So the tips that I do like to give in this space are more principle-based. I gave this analogy with the Line Cook Thoughts podcast. Ray had me on the show a couple days ago. Listen to it, it's a great interview. But basically the example I gave was to kind of find those moments where you're losing seconds. So the example I gave was like, you're at a countertop like this, and for every pearl onion that you're trying to peel, you're reaching across the table into a plastic container to grab a new onion. If you set your station up in the way where it's like, onions are here, waste bin is here, finished onions are here, reverse it a little bit. So it's like, raw onions are here, waste bin is here, finished onions are here. You can kind of just stand there and peel as you go, and then you don't have to spend these extra seconds reaching every single time. I saw this really funny chart floating around where it's like, if you save this many seconds and you do this task X number of times per day, this however much time it saves you. I'm going to put it right here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But think about it. You save 5 seconds on all these projects. Every single time you do that repetition, it's going to save you a lot of time. And I know that advice isn't always the best, because sometimes you don't see it, and sometimes you're like, yes, but I am working efficient, but I still can't get faster. That goes back to my advice that I gave in another video, where it's like, until you push yourself beyond that point, that's when you'll kind of like see the benefits. Until you know what it's like to prep for 80, then you'll get better at prepping for 60. Does that make sense? Another really weird thing that might help you, it might not, it just works in my brain sometimes, is like, try to think about the way that a robot would do it. Like, if we as humans are very tactile, we need to use all 10 fingers to get a lot of these projects done, but if it was a robot and they had one robotic arm and they were in charge of doing something, how would they do it? And then maybe that might even like reframe how you hold something in your hand, or how you use gravity to your advantage. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. This is just stuff that goes through my head when I'm trying to think of like how to get faster at certain things. Kelsey Thomas asks, "I got into culinary late in life, trucker for 25 years, started culinary school, second restaurant in the city of Detroit, now Garmager. I want to move up to GM. I'm really building up my speed and my attention to detail. There will be a time when I might want to try something new. Do I try a new restaurant to fill my needs?" There was this really crazy thing that happened when I was working in Norway, when we would get slow between January and basically middle of March. And my chef, basically, there was only 8 of us, like between 6 or 8 of us working in the kitchen. And so he said to us, "I want all of you to go stage somewhere in a place that makes sense to you." So one guy went and learned charcuterie. Another woman went to like an aquaculture farm. I went to Frantzen in Stockholm because I was really interested in bringing a more fine dining element to the restaurant. And my chef encouraged that, because he knew that if he could send us off, give us the freedom to spread our wings, we would come back with these skills to help improve what we were all trying to do. So that being said, maybe there is an opportunity for you to go work at a restaurant, and if you like the people that you're working with, and for whatever reason, because there isn't space, because they can't hire you as an assistant GM and the GM position is taken and that person doesn't want to leave, maybe you can go somewhere and come back when that time comes. Goes back to that point I made about the fact that your career is long, and for whatever reason it is, some industry people like to leave places by burning the bridge, and that's the only way to kind of like make them feel like their ego is still in check. It just comes down to communication, right? Like, if you talk to the person who is in charge of making these decisions and say, "Listen, I really want to grow my skills, I don't want to leave this company permanently, but what you're offering right now isn't exactly what I have in mind." I think you would be surprised because they're way better off letting you go spread your wings rather than keeping you where you're at, where you're miserable. I know every single restaurant is different, but it goes back to so much of the content that I try to share here, where there's so many other places to either get experience or go off and do your own thing, right? So there was that story I told in the last episode of the Emulsion podcast where a bunch of chefs are getting side hustles now. So what if you could request to work a couple less hours at your place that you're working now, grow in a restaurant while positions are filled, you work a couple less hours, they pay you less, but then you grow these skills that fulfill you in another capacity. I know that didn't directly answer your question, but hopefully it gives you a couple of different options. Eric Honas asks, hey Justin, I've been cooking since I was 14 in Denver, got a stage at Gaghan, got a foot in the door, returning from the stage, I want to move to Chicago and continue this path. What should my next move be to achieve my goal to start getting Michelin experience? I mean, it sounds like you're already there, right? Like you are moving to a city with a Michelin guide that has a lot of great Michelin restaurants. You've staged at Gaghan. I guess my question from here becomes, what is holding you back? Is it something where, you know, you staged at this place and it's just a stage, so they aren't wanting to hire you on for a full line cook position? Because I've certainly had that happen before. Is it because you don't think you have the confidence, or because you're trying to shoot for 3 stars when you should really just go from stage to line cook at 1 star? If it were me, if we were to trade spots for a second, I would just continue down the path that you're on. You're going to a great city. There's a lot of great restaurants. Use like the free email template that I have, send it out to 15 restaurants, you get a stage, and that's your foot in the door. It's not devaluing your experience at all. It's just, if you had the feet in the door that you're saying that you have, you wouldn't be asking the question. Stay humble, stay hungry, get a few stages on the calendar, and then move up from there. Joshua Lepat says, hi Justin, I'm a culinary school student, big fan. I've been watching your videos a lot and I find them very helpful. I would just like to ask, how does one deal with criticism and competition? This is a really interesting question because I fall in both camps, right? Like, I grew up with parents who were not competitive at all. They never urged me to do any sort of competition stuff, but it's evident, right? Like, there's some inherent competitiveness in my nature that wants to just like beat your face in if we're in the ring together. There's a nuance to your question though, and that's what I really want to address in my answer. Is you said, how do you deal with criticism and competition? So what I'm hearing there is maybe there's an element of feeling like you're not good enough, maybe feeling like there's people that are surrounding you that are better than you. I know the feeling. It's really intense. It's kind of cutthroat. You don't always feel safe in the position where you are. And unless it's causing you an immense amount of anxiety, or you're literally just scared to go to work and it paralyzes you, I would look at it as a good thing. There's this quote that a bunch of successful people talk about, and I'm gonna restate it here, and it's to try to be the dumbest person in the room. There's something that happens when you feel just like dwarfed and like you're surrounded by giants and all these people are just operating at a level that you can't even fathom operating at. And it sounds like that's what you have in a certain regard. So instead of trying to deal with it, I would try to think about like, how can I get on this person's level? How can I ask these really thoughtful questions to probe into like how they're performing at the place that they're performing at? Try to notice these little nuances of how they set up their station, or how they communicate with each other, or like how they write their prep list. What's the first thing that they do when they get in for work? Unfortunately, in a lot of kitchens, with some of the egos that go along with it, once you get to that level where people want to kind of admire you, sometimes it's a habit for you to kind of talk shit on people that aren't as good as you. And there's nothing I can do about that. That's where maybe the criticism and competition part comes into it. But if you can flip the script and maybe be a little bit hungrier and want to kind of like get on their level, not stick it to them, but you know what I mean? It sounds like you've got some inherent motivation in you, and I would try to look at the competition and the fuel as like gasoline on your fire rather than something that's trying to douse you out. Jack Castilas Jones says, working in a casual dining kitchen, considering culinary school, is it worth it? If there are any in the UK that I can recommend, thank you. I'm gonna actually leave this to people in the comments because I don't have any experience with UK culinary school. I did a whole apprenticeship program generation thing while I made the program basically for apprentices at the restaurant in Norway. So I have some experience there because I know that there's like school part and then an apprenticeship part. I went through something kind of similar here, but I would actually leave it to you folks in the comments. If anybody has experience on UK culinary school specifically, please leave them down low so that Jack can get your answers. Sarah Doan is really curious, am I still using the Chrome's chef knife roll? Whether or not I am, what pros and cons have popped up since I got it? I loved making that review video. I still keep in touch with the guys from Chrome. They're awesome, awesome people. And don't get me wrong, it's a great product. It's just, it's too big for the stuff that I carry around. I could fill it half full, basically. And when it's half full, it doesn't carry very nicely. Like, as I said in my review, there's no shoulder strap, so it doesn't fit the way that I like to carry. And so I think, I want to say it was in a Twitch live stream. I gave it away to someone who could have used it much better than I could. So that one did get given away. I'm still seeking the perfect knife bag. It's just down there. I have a video that I'm going to be producing. You're going to see it in a couple of days, and it's something that that comes closer. It's getting closer. I think the next knife bag that I want to check out that I think might check almost all the boxes is the Dark Heart Slim knife bag. Nathan Blair asks, was there a moment in my culinary life that completely shifted the direction I was going in for the better? Yes, and if I had to give I would say, looking back, there was probably 2 moments where this happened. The first time was when I went to Alinea, and it was when I really, really, really wanted to do my externship there. I had a horrible stage there. It was a silent kitchen. I didn't like being around any of those people, and what ended up happening was I kind of like went back to New York. I was super upset. I was pushed so hard. I staged at all these places because I wanted Alinea to be the place. Had that moment not happened, that would have never led me to Per Se, which never would have led me to French Laundry, which never would have led me to Norway. So that was one of those moments that I feel like if I would have said yes to Alinea, it's that butterfly effect moment where my life would have went in a completely different direction. And if I had to share one other moment, it's not one concrete moment. It was kind of like a buildup of a bunch of things over time, like my observations and the current landscape of kind of like where things were at the time. It was like 2014, 2015, and that was when I kind of made the decision like, okay, I really want to start doing content. And it was the first video that I published on YouTube was my Hong Kong travel movie, and that was like that. Once I hit that moment of like hitting publish on YouTube, things were never the same. So yeah, I think that first example was like something that I thought was bad that actually ended up being good, and then the other one was like something that maybe from the outside looked kind of silly and stupid, but in the long run is like providing me with the resources to do what I'm able to do now. Kevin Smiths asks, how do I stay motivated in the day-to-day operation of a kitchen? What pushes you? I'm having some trouble staying as enthusiastic and motivated as I should be. I feel like we all go through these moments, right? Where it's like the progress bar isn't moving, the menu hasn't changed in a couple of months, you're just busy, it's a slog, you're maybe experiencing some symptoms of burnout, you're not getting paid well, it's a lot of hours, you're sacrificing a lot. For me, I'm a really bad person to ask these sorts of questions to because I said it in one of my last videos that I was a really impatient person, especially early in my career. If I wasn't seeing progress happening really, really quickly, I wasn't willing to stick around. And so what that gave me the benefit of doing is that it let me move around a lot. It allowed me to be very adaptable. I was able to go from kitchen to kitchen and be able to change, make friends quickly, learn the menus really fast, learn like the kitchen structures. So for everybody that says that yes, you should spend, 5 years at a place before you move on, that person only has 5 years of experience at that restaurant. I had 5 years of like 1-year stints at all these different places, which then gave me the breadth of knowledge where I wasn't just singularly faceted. I had experience from different kitchens and different chefs and different environments and different cuisine as well. And what ultimately ended up happening was I finally landed in a kitchen, and this was the kitchen in Norway, where the progress was able to go very, very fast. I basically went from chef de partie on entremet station to sous chef in about 10 months, which is kind of unheard of in a lot of other kitchens where that track normally takes like 2 to 4 years. For me, progress is always going to be the thing that pushes me the furthest, and so I like having an open runway. I like having a little bit of mentorship and a lot of open road. And because I don't know the restaurant that you work at or whatever opportunities you have in front of you, and also your ambition, I can't fully answer the question for you, but maybe it takes a change in your environment. Maybe it takes getting a different job at a place that, again, this is kind of like the nuance that was maybe missed in the video that I talked about the other day of like, do you go to a 3-star place or a 2-star place? If what motivates you is being part of a team, being part of something that's larger than you, maybe you're better off going to the 3 Michelin star place. For someone like me, I finally got happiness when I went to the place that had no Michelin stars and no recognition, but we did a ton of great guest chef dinners, and we were working with probably the best seafood in arguably the world, right? Outside of like maybe Japan. I mean, places in Copenhagen and Stockholm and like Faviken all got their seafood from Norway, from the west coast of Norway. So I was working with some of the best stuff. My chef was hilarious. I got paid better than I ever got paid. I got to travel a bunch. And I told my chef that. I was like, I don't want a raise. I would just want to get more vacation time so that I could go travel a little bit more. The motivation is always different for everyone, and you have to answer that question for yourself. But I think there's a way to kind of be a little bit more transparent about that with the people that you're working with, where if title motivates you, if time off motivates you, if working with more purveyors players motivates you. You can bring that up in conversation, especially if you're in that place to, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't think there's enough communication that happens in restaurants, because I think we would all be a little bit better off if we kind of just said what we wanted, as opposed to thinking that everybody had to be this really robotic soldier that just kind of shows up and yes, chef, and works all these long hours. I don't know, it's different for everybody. John Gracie asks, I'm currently a teen who one day wants to be a professional chef. I love food and how important it is in today's world. This career path can be hard, and I'm quite doubtful of my financial future. I value doing something that gives a purpose and fulfillment in life, so being a future chef, culinary pioneer is my main goal. If college is the right decision, and if so, what's the best college major that I can take in this situation besides culinary arts, and how can it help in my future career? That is a great question. I don't think I've had that asked to me ever before, or even like contemplated that. So the best answer that I think I can give is to go along the lines that I feel like I've like been beating to death, is the fact that the age of the standalone chef is over. There will not be the kind of like Paul Bocuse with one restaurant and that's kind of like his legacy kind of thing. I think we're going to start to see like the Alex Stupak story that I covered in the podcast a couple days ago, where he builds this one empire with Mexican food and tacos, and then he takes the staff at that restaurant and then lets them kind of like roam free under this one umbrella that is his. So how do you find a chef that wants to do that, and then find the skills that you can educate yourself on that can then benefit that person? So it's not to say that in order to be famous in food, you have to be a chef, right? You use the word culinary pioneer, whether it's marketing or media production or getting in touch with people who can then help you make more money, or, you know, finding spaces around town, sourcing product, working with wine. There are a lot of positions where if you can get maybe on the ground floor or a couple levels up with someone who's really making moves. I mean, like, I think about the person who is partnering with David Chang to make Major Domo media right now. Like, that career didn't exist 10 years ago, but it will, and it's going to continue to exist. And when you're thinking about your future or 10 years down the line, it's really, really hard to do that. I didn't know I was going to be producing media. I taught myself how to produce media, right? So it's like, how much of this can you teach yourself down the road? How beneficial is it for you to actually get an education in one of these things? If you kind of take that idea out of your head of, I have to be the chef, I have to be the main thing, maybe you can help someone else that's doing their thing. You guys can partner together, be 50-50 or third, right? You have three people going in it together where you're the marketing guru and this person is the chef and this person does wine. Then it doesn't seem that unrealistic. Emilie Frederic asks, currently making the transition from being a pastry cook to working the line for the first time at a fine dining restaurant. What would my best advice be? You can go about this a couple of different ways. I don't know what the restaurant is like or how long you've been there. If you know exactly what the line cooks like to do, how they set up their station, what kind of like their normal workflow looks like, maybe you try to copy that. Maybe you're the polar opposite in the pastry section, and so maybe, I don't know, maybe you can take some principles of pastry and bring them to the line. The main difference, at least from my experience, is that pastry is a little bit more like prep heavy, and then service is a little bit more subdued because you're either pulling things out of the lowboy and just plating them, or you're using a lot of dry goods. Being on the line is totally different because prep might not be that heavy, but service is a slog. So just prepare yourself for that. I think service is going to be a little bit more difficult because you're going to require a little bit more movement on your part. It also requires a little bit more coordination and memorization and like figuring out your timing. But overall, if you've been working at that restaurant for a while, I think you'll have most of the basics down as far as like the kitchen culture goes. You know where everything is in the walk-in and dry storage. You know how to clean down. You know all the standards basically, so you don't have to work through any of that. I look at it kind of like changing sections in a symphony orchestra, right? Like if you were playing in percussion for the last couple of years and then all of a sudden you want to change to like the brass section, it's kind of the same, but like you can't take all the principles over because it's a totally different section. But because you've played in that symphony before and you've been doing it for a while, you can kind of like take a little bit of that, and maybe like you'll find this weird hybrid of, because I'm good at pastry, that makes me so much more organized in being a line cook. Miguel Salazar says, my wife bought me these. I'm going to put the video here, and I just wanted your take on them. I do not find them to be any better than a traditional kitchen utensil, but with the exception of a fish turner, not much worse for a home chef. Is there some advantage that I see that you might be missing?
Take a look down there at the end. We're familiar with the aqua, but look, you can pick it up in the aqua. This is the green. We love the green too. Still available. We're just launching right now. Red is the color that you saw on the cutting board. We love red in the kitchen, and we have red available in our brand new Today Special Value. Now let's dive into our 5 brand new colors. This is the multi.
Man, now you really got me wanting to do like a QFC parody video of like a knife or a knife roll. stay tuned for that. To answer your question though, I think about this a little bit like camera gear, right? Like I have a 16 to 35 2.8 lens on this right now. I could have a 16 millimeter 1.4, a 24 millimeter 1.4, a 35 millimeter 1.4, which would technically be better lenses, but now I have 3 lenses to haul around, right? So I get one lens that kind of like provides me the scope that I need. I'm skilled enough to use the lens to the way that I think that I want it to do what I need it to do. And I kind of call it a day with that, right? Like I'm much more likely to make the trade-off of being like more lean, more nimble, being able to master the tool, as opposed to like the tool being the master of me. Like, can you imagine like, oh, I can't work the station today, I don't have my spatula. No, just use the spatula that you have. It's gonna be fine. I mean, to me, it seems like they fit all the bills for what I look for in silicone tools, right? It's colorful, so like you can tell that it's yours. It is unibody, so there's no pieces that can pop off. It's pretty heat resistant, and the tips seem to bend in just the right way. And it sounds like you already have them, so I hope you're enjoying using them. Akshay asks, explain how to run a restaurant. I did some research and profits are hard to reach, so something with how to design a menu and run a restaurant. I'm gonna try to not talk ad nauseum about like how to do the numbers thing, because I have a video that talks all about how to like keep track of the numbers and what food cost actually means and labor cost and operational expenses. And you're right, it is hard to reach a profit in a restaurant because so many of these things are out of your control, or they make up the cost of whatever you're serving. It's also something that I brought up in my interview that I did with Mike Trong, where like, say you're a headphone producer and Wired magazine covers your headphones. If you get a sudden influx of orders, you can call your factory in China and say, hey, can you make me more headphones? Hang up the phone, boom, your customers are happy, you just made a buttload of money. In a restaurant, if Bon Appetit writes about you or the New York Times gives you a great review and you suddenly get a big influx of people, you have to start telling them no. So the economics don't always work in your favor. So you, as a restaurant, you kind of have to find that happy medium of like being just busy enough so that you can continue to like generate revenue, but not being too busy where you consistently have to say no, because then you start thinking about opening up another place and then you have 2 places that are just halfway full. I could literally talk about this for like an 8-hour day. The best tips that I found from chefs that I've worked for that design like profitable menus and are thinking about food in a really cool way. Finding ways to get what they would call butts in seats is one of the most underrated elements that a kind of like restaurateur or business owner can do, whether that's like happy hour or offering free beverages or figuring out a way to get the customer in the door through that dining decision. Like when they have to go out to eat, should they choose you? If the answer is yes, you're gonna make a little bit more money, then you can drive revenue after that. And then another really interesting business model that comes to mind was this butcher shop that I worked for when I was in Napa, right after French Laundry. And what they would do was they would take this raw meat and take it through the entire cycle of the whole thing, right? So they would get in a raw pork shoulder, and then it would sit in the case. If someone bought the pork shoulder, great. If it got to a couple days after that, they would break it down, grind it into sausages, right? That sausage would then sit in the case, and if someone bought it, great. If it didn't get bought as a sausage, then it would get made into a sandwich, and then we would sell that sandwich for lunch. And the best part about all of that was that they would host cooking classes where they would have like 8 or 10 people come in, teach them how to make sausage, send them home with a couple pounds of sausage, but that batch that they made was actually like, they were paying to be the labor that would then make the sausage, because essentially you were just following a recipe. And then they would sell that sausage in the case. It was such a genius business model. And much like you said, when the margins are slim and the profits are hard to come by, any kind of like picking up pennies that you can do is gonna be a win in the long run. Payson asks, hey Justin, just finished the intermezzo about how to talk about food. Got kind of lost when I started talking about food descriptions being 1 word or too short on menus. I'm a chef who prefers to list the ingredients and keep it short, but now I'm contemplating, is it enough? What's the good balance between finding too short or being too wordy? Really good question. I love this kind of follow-up thing because sometimes when I'm writing a video, I see it one way, but then when I get your feedback, it turns into something else. And this is something that I wish I could kind of inject in the video, but YouTube doesn't let us edit these kinds of things. I guess to clarify, I don't have any problems with short menu descriptions. If you want to write sunchoke, celery, mustard, pine nut on your menu, and that's the dish, that's great because like I said, it makes it so that the guest doesn't come in with too many expectations. If you say brown butter roasted sunchoke, pickled celery, honey, brown butter, mustard, and what was the last thing I said? Cilantro pesto, then it kind of makes it something where it's like, oh, because I've had that before, this is kind of what I expect with a brown butter roasted sunchoke. Do you know what I mean? The problem I have is when chefs like to write menus like that as kind of like a crutch because they actually don't know how to talk or describe their food. And then when eater calls to ask about your menu or you're trying to train your front of house staff on how to talk to the guest, you can't do it effectively, which then causes problems down the line. That's what I have the problem with. And the problem with a lot of this is very similar to like my food aversions video. Sometimes other chefs will ruin it for you. You're really good at kind of like just giving the amount of information that they need to order the dish, and you're really good about surprise and delighting them. But then there's another chef who's not so good at doing that. They're like, whatever description they write is totally misleading to what the guest actually gets. And then the guest says, oh, I want to know exactly what this is. Can you tell me a little bit more about this dish? Because the last time that I ordered from a one-word ingredient menu, I got really disappointed. And so it's not always on you for setting those expectations, but just be aware that sometimes people have a bad experience. And then the polar opposite end of the spectrum is like employing all 4 of those principles that I talk about in that video and just being an exhaustive list of what every single dish is. Do what feels right for you. Describe your food however you want to describe it. It's just don't get upset because you don't know enough about how to talk about food. The other thing that I didn't mention, and maybe this is something that might answer a couple questions for you that are thinking about different career paths, there's a book that's up on the shelf there, and it's the L'Estrance's book. And basically the chef has his front of house partner, and his front of house partner is really good at talking about food, and the chef isn't the best at describing why he came up with the combinations that he came up with. All he needs to tell this front of house person is what's in it, and then they are able to convey that kind of idea to the guest. And I thought that was a really interesting relationship where like one is a master of flavor and creativity and aesthetic, and the other is a master in like communication and hospitality. So just because I'm saying that talking about food is a weakness of yours doesn't mean it's the end all be all of your career. Just something to think about. Champ asks, how about a tour of my kitchen? Yes, it's coming soon. Stay tuned. H to the P 33 asks, what's the best knife to do some fine vegetable cuts, julienne, brunoise, etc.? I think it depends on the vegetable that you're cutting, as well as kind of like your level of skill. Some chefs that I've worked with will do like the julienne with a larger knife and then switch to like a petty knife for the brunoise part. If it were me and you were just starting off, I would suggest you to start with like a Nikiri style knife or even like the bunka that I reviewed. Gerald Pa, I've been contemplating on whether or not I should go to culinary school or slowly grind my way up in the industry. In my past Emulsion episodes, I always stated that it's never worth it to go to culinary school, but I'm just curious how one can make the same connections with the top tier kitchens and restaurants without the school making those connections. Would appreciate any insight you have on this topic. You're right, I have said that culinary school isn't 100% worth it. But on the flip side, there's another gentleman that I'm about to have on the podcast that says that culinary school was amazing and he loved his experience. And I also credit it a lot to the fact that like I probably wouldn't have gotten a foot in the door at per se without Culinary Institute of America behind me. I guess to clarify and put it on the record, it's not that I'm saying culinary school isn't worth it. I'm just saying it's not right for everybody. So I guess my next follow-up question for Gerald would be, have you done any stages anywhere? Do you have any restaurant experience? Because I feel like that's sometimes where it starts. If you can manage to spend enough time at a place where the person that's running the show there can then recommend you to somebody else, that will then lead to other things. I talk about my friend Spencer all the time, where he staged at this restaurant in Minneapolis called Spoon and Stable. The chef there knows Grant Achatz. That's how he got a stage at Alinea. It's funny how these things work once you try to get into it. Because at a certain point in so many industries, not just food, it becomes a game of it's not what you know, it's who you know, and the faster you can kind of build that professional network, the better. Dale Esperanza, what's next in the gastronomy world? Just keep listening to the podcast. It's always changing, and it's one of the reasons why I continue to produce the podcast, because it's something that I always want to have a pulse on, and it's always going to change, but I'm always going to kind of keep my pulse on it and act when I see it's appropriate. Anthony, in my opinion, what are some of the qualities of a great sous chef, and how do you delegate effectively/efficiently? I know these are very vague questions with lots of ways to answer them, but recently I've been doubting my leadership abilities. Thank you. It's a great question. It's something that I've worked through with coaching clients in the past, because it is something that's very rough, and it's something that nobody comes out, I talk about the fact that nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to wield a knife and how to make roux, right? We all learn how to do that. Leadership is exactly the same thing, which to some people is great to hear. Some people it's like horrible to hear, because some people think that leadership is like this inherent thing and you're born a leader, but it's not true. It's something where like it's fluid. You can learn how to do it, which is amazing, because if you don't think that you're great, there's resources out there to make you better. So I really thank you for your patience. I have a video coming out. It's called On on managing, and it's gonna talk all about all of these things. The one tip I am able to give though now, because I don't want to leave you hanging, is that there's a difference between going from being like the lead line cook, which is normally where you are before you become a sous chef, to that sous chef position, because first-time sous chefs are notoriously bad at thinking that they're still part of the line cook brigade, when in reality they then have to start to lead the line cook brigade. It's a very different thing. Your responsibility as a sous chef is to make sure things are taken care of so the line can do their job effectively, and it's also to make sure that they feel safe doing their job. Nobody likes the feeling of dreading that they're going to come into work because their sous chef is going to get pissed off at something. It doesn't really seem like you're that type of person, but you would be so surprised how many people like lead by fear instead of leading by safety, and I think that's a really important distinction. It's that whole mentality of like, they don't work for you, you work for them. Start to think about it like that. Oh man, Champ back with another question. What knife would I recommend for a beginner home cook, not a culinary school student or restaurant chef? Victorinox 5-box Pro. I've done a couple reviews on it. Check it out. Alex Henow says, love the channel, keep it up. Large food truck trailer in a commissary with a fermentarium where I have some young projects not mature to sell yet. I want to take the business in the direction of selling these to restaurants, farmers markets, and do restaurant consultation for their own in-house fermentation projects and more. A couple pop-ups planned this year, drawn on showcase and collab with local chefs however I can. Can I recommend to reach out to people and chefs in a small, non-adventurous food city? That is a great project. I've never heard of something like that before. But my question is, why didn't you put in your question what city you're located in? Because if you would have said, hey, I'm in Cincinnati, you might already have a couple of comments on the question. People that are like, hey, I'm in Cincinnati, I like fermentation. Alex, I have a form in my website that says like contact, right, when you go to justinkhanna.com. Send me an email and we'll figure out a way where I can like put a word out to a bunch of people, because I don't think fermentation is something that's going away, especially if it's something where you can help them design something that's like HACCP okay, and it provides results, and it's a little bit more consistent, and you can like tell them about shelf life on a certain amount of things, that you can provide a lot of value to a lot of chefs and restaurants out there. So send me an email, we'll figure out a way to connect, and then I can get the word out to everybody. Question from Jordan Baal. Suggestions from someone who got into the field slinging food, wanting to transcend that and see what the food of the best restaurants is all about. This is totally depending on your ambition, and if this is something where you had an epiphany where you're like, I want to own one of these places someday because I saw a Chef's Table episode, or you met someone at a conference, or you had this fantastic meal out with your partner, that's very different than just kind of wanting to understand it and see what the hype is all about. It's one of the reasons why I suggest people to go stage and to not frame it as like I'm going to work for a job or I'm trying to get a sous chef position. It's like, go and just present it as an observational thing. Literally send an email, say, I kind of want to see what Michelin cooking is all about, and don't necessarily say Michelin cooking. Say, I want to know what Momofuku Ko is all about. I kind of want to have a behind the scenes. Can I stand there and peel fava beans for you just to kind of see what it's like in the kitchen? If you send enough of those emails, someone is bound to say yes, because like you said, you're already in the industry, you have some sort of resume available, you can do that and basically like spend one of your days off that you would probably normally spend watching Netflix or playing Super Smash Bros. Ultimate like me, and finally answer this question and maybe pique your curiosity a little bit, or kind of like put the whole thing to bed and you're like, okay, I saw it, Last question from Joe Smith. To start, which direction would I go to open a food truck or small 1,500 square foot shop? We sell churros as a pop-up for the last 2 years. Want to go to the next step, and our research tells us both options are good and bad. Would love my opinion. If you and I were to become business partners tomorrow, I would immediately want to know what kind of like the vibe was at these pop-ups, because that is going to kind of dictate what the next move is. If the pop-ups were something where it was really fast and furious, everybody was kind of like in and out, you had the churros ready to go, they were flying out the door, the line was amazing, you had all these different options, people were taking photos, and it was great. If it was like that, I would probably say that the food truck would be the better option, because then you could create systems for that to make it more consistent, you could get the recipes down, you could buy a couple of different trucks, you could spread out across the city, become this really kind of trendy churro thing. On the flip side, thinking about the shop, I think about my friend Mi Kim with her pop-ups. She started her donut shop, which is like, again, very small, 1,500 square foot donut shop, and her pop-ups were very much so like she partnered with cafes, she worked with different beverage companies, so that when you come to a pop-up, yes, maybe you stand in line and you're taking all these selfies, but the experience is like you get a whole box of different donuts, and you sit down and you like have a conversation with people, and it's kind of like an alternative to going out to brunch. And she doesn't specialize in wholesale because she doesn't want her donuts to sit there for more than 6 hours, so she expects them all to sell out between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. And so very much so, like you said, they both have pros and cons. I would just want to know, like, based on the experience, like, think about that perfect service for yourself. Like, is it really cozy and there's coffee and beverages involved, or maybe it's a late night thing and you want to do late night churros. Picture that perfect day eating one of Joe Smith's churros and then reverse engineer from there. Because I don't necessarily think, and it doesn't sound like this decision is going to change your product, it's going to change the experience. So start to think about what kind of experience are you wanting to generate and then go from there. Because you're totally right, both options are good and bad. Whew, that was a lot of questions. I'm super happy that I could answer all of them. I'm sorry if this video was super long. Maybe I'll turn it into a podcast. Let's see what happens. As I mentioned, this is the first iteration of what I'm calling Ask JK. Thank you so much for everybody that submitted your question. I hope I was able to help in some way, shape, or form. Gonna shoot for doing these every single month. February is a little bit crazy, and I really wanted to make this first one something where I answered everybody's question, because I would hate the, like, where do I stop? Where do I stop asking questions? Maybe what I do going forward is I pick like 10 questions, and what you folks can do then is I will ask everybody to like, and like very similar to Reddit, right? Like the questions with the most likes are going to be the ones that get asked. And then after that, I go like, if there's 7 that have likes, then I'll just pick 3 random ones after that. If you're the person that made it this long in the AMA, you're kind of the person that I want to know about that. So going forward, Ask JK stuff on YouTube, like the questions that you want to see me cover, and that's kind of like what's going to happen. So shooting for February, it's probably going to be like an on-the-road version because I'm traveling a lot. Until I see you in the next video, which should be in the next couple of days, my name is Justin Khanna, and I hope you have a good one.